Hello, I'm Jim Johnston, Chief Technology Officer here at McElroy. I'm going to talk to you today about where we are with McElroy Optimized Cooling. But first, we need to go back and bring everybody up to speed on what exactly McElroy Optimized Cooling is. At INFUSION18, we introduced the idea of an optimized cooling time during the fusion process. And in INFUSION19, we rolled out the final product on the Data Logger 6. But where did this idea start? Over the years, McElroy has been approached by users, and we've looked at ways to streamline and bring efficiency to the joining process. Look no further than the Trackstar line, poly horses, pipe stands, and a myriad of other products. While we have always optimized the equipment, we have not looked at optimizing the fusion procedure itself. Now, the biggest area for reduction in time is the cooling process during the fusion process. In fact, we know that people are already shortening that cool time because of the data logger. Now, why would I say that? People have told us that they love the data logger, especially since the advent of the Data Logger 6, but it slows them down. And that always has bothered me. And I would ask why. And the answer that we got consistently every time was we don't cool that long. In other words, the data logger shows that they weren't following the procedure because they were shortcutting the cool time. So we know that users have been cutting their cool times, but we don't know how they've been doing it, what the consistency is, where the quality is, or anything else. So let's look at an example of an actual cool time requirements per ASTM F2620. I want to look at an 18-inch DR7 piece of pipe. And we're going to say that it's sitting on the ground at 75 degrees or roughly 24 degrees ambient air temperature. The F2620 cool time requirement is 11 minutes per inch of wall thickness. For this 18-inch DR7, that's roughly 28 minutes of cool time. It's a fairly significant amount of time in the fusion process, and it is the longest part of the fusion process itself. So we started looking at what could be done. Now, when you're a hammer, every problem is a nail. McElroy is a manufacturer, and we wanted to manufacture equipment. Quite simply, that's what we do. It's in our DNA. That's what we do. It's how we do things. So that's where we started. We started to look at what we could do to build something that would shorten that cool time. And we worked towards a way to reduce the cool time after fusing using a piece of equipment. What we found was that applying cooling to the joint did not make a credible difference, especially as the pipe walls got thicker. Now, really, this wasn't much of a surprise. We know HDPE is a poor conductor, or said differently, HDPE is a great insulator. That's why the Yeti coolers work so well. Think about this example. Let's start with a cooler full of beer or whatever your favorite beverage is. Seal it up and blow a fan on it. Now, is that fan going to change the temperature inside the cooler? No, it's not. It may affect the outside of the cooler, but it's not going to affect the inside of the cooler. In the same way, we found that even extreme cold applied to the outside of the pipe had very little effect on the middle of the pipe wall. What we did find, though, is that through all of the data that we developed, we could very accurately predict the temperature of the center of that pipe wall over time. Again, this is very important. We found with all that data, we could build a formula that predicts the temperature of the center of that pipe wall over time. So through massive amounts of continued testing and validation, we developed a proprietary patent-pending formula. This formula allows us to calculate an optimized cooling time that reduces the overall fusion process while giving the user confidence in the strength of the joint produced. Let's go back to our previous example of an 18-inch DR7 at 75 degrees ambient temperature. 28 minutes of cool time are required per the ASTM F2620 standard. Now, using our formula, that minimum cool time would now drop to 12 minutes. Let's assume we're pipelining, putting in pipe joint to joint to joint to joint, and can transition that joint in 10 minutes. That would mean for a standard ASTM F2620 joint at 28 minutes, you could get about 11 joints per 10-hour shift. Using the McElroy Optimized Cooling process, we could get as many as 16 joints in that same 10-hour shift, almost a 50% increase in productivity for the day, while still maintaining the quality of that joint. Now, how do we do this? This is done using the Data Logger 6 and now the Data Logger 7 and I-Series TrackStar machines. Note that this is listed on the screen as ASTM F2620 with McElroy Optimized Cooling. Optimized Cooling is not available on older data loggers prior to the Data Logger 6 or in McCalc, because this process requires dynamic live data input, including the bulk pipe temperature, the air temperature, and the actual heating time that goes into this joint. Older data loggers are not able to calculate and take in that data, and McCalc is not going to serve you well as you're in the middle of the heating cycle. So this software actually pushed out to the field on October 1st of 2019, just this past year. Now, what's happened since that launch? October 1st software launch, the first joint was recorded and installed on October 7th of 2019. So we already had people that had been interested in this from our initial introduction of the process back in 2018. And as soon as that software was out there, there was a project ready to go on this process. To date, roughly 30,000 joints have been made using McElroy Optimized Cooling. Now let's look how that plays out geographically. From our data logger anonymized vault data, we can see global adoption. The United States, Canada, Mexico, and parts of the Caribbean have already used it. We've seen joints made in India, and we've seen a lot of joints made using optimized cooling in Australia. Now from there, if we zoom in and look more closely at the United States, you can see that there's pretty widespread usage throughout the 50 states. And there's a little group here in the Northeast and the Northwest where we know that typically there's not a lot of large diameter projects, but there are some interests there as well. And then a weird swath right through the middle of the country in the Midwest. We'll work on that, and there'll be more projects that come through for there. But overall, we see a really strong adoption rate of McElroy Optimized Cooling. In fact, we've seen many of the months since the launch back in October of 2019, where nearly 20% of all the Data Logger 6 joints reported into the vault were actually reported as McElroy Optimized Cooling. Remember that McElroy Optimized Cooling is only available in that Data Logger 6 and now the 7 and I-Series machines. So now let's look at what pipe sizes have been used doing McElroy Optimized Cooling. It's been across the board. We have seen joints made anywhere from 2-inch or 63 millimeter size up to 63-inch diameter or 1600 millimeter diameter. So a little bit of usage across the entire board. I'll be honest, this is a little surprising to me, especially in the smaller sizes. People do see the advantage. There is a great advantage there, but typically we don't see long runs, and the overall fusion time is shorter. So I was surprised to see some of these smaller sizes here. Again, significant savings, but in a smaller capacity. In general, if we break down the pipes into large being 20-inch up to 63-inch diameter, or 500 millimeter to 1600 millimeter, medium sizes being 8 through 18-inch or 250 millimeter to 450 millimeter, and small being 2 to 6-inch diameter or 63 to 180, we see that large diameter pipes do make up almost 50% of the joints reported, with medium diameter making up a close second, around 35%. So about 85% of the joints are made in that 8-inch or larger sizes. Now let's look at wall thickness. Again, here is a fairly even distribution of wall thicknesses all the way from DR7 up to DR32.5. Again, this one is one that I was a little surprised by the amount of higher DR numbers. But I believe this is driven primarily by the pipe mix being larger diameter and therefore heavier wall. Even a 63-inch DR17 or 19 is a very thick wall pipe. The greater the wall thickness, the longer the cool time, and the greater the advantage of McElroy Optimized Cooling on a given job. And this plays out when we look at machines using McElroy Optimized Cooling. The two highest volumes are in that 618 and Trackstar 900 class. These match up well with the distribution of sizes, again, in that larger diameter and that medium diameter. Now that's where we are today. But let me take us back once more to the beginning of the story. And let's talk about testing. As part of the original test basis, we did extensive testing, including McSnapper per ASTM 2634. Many of you may know that as the high-speed tensile impact tester. Guided side bend testing per ASTM F3183. I'm going to come back to that one a little bit later. And in-field testing. So we've done a lot of testing out there to give us a basis for all of the pieces that we've done. Throughout this, we've also seen that there's times that we've been asked to do more long-term testing. What about longer testing? Out of an abundance of caution, we have done that. And we made a series of joints and tested them per D1598, elevated temperature sustained pressure test. Now this test consists of installing pressure caps on the end of a test section of pipe containing the joint, taking that full assembly and putting it into a heated bath of water and pressurizing that section. For this particular test, we did an 80 degrees C or 176 degrees Fahrenheit test with a hoop stress of 660 PSI for 1,000 hours. So 1,000 hour 80 degrees C test. A failure of either the pipe or the joint during this 1,000 hours is considered a failure. The testing we did was initiated with joints using 6-inch DR11 pipe, 6-inch DR7 pipe, and 12-inch DR7 pipe. Now these tests have been broken up into 3 sets of joints for the 1,000-hour test, as the testing facility can only handle so many pipe samples at a time for the size of pipe. If you remember that picture of the equipment, the bath size and the equipment size is limited. Therefore, there's only so many pieces of pipe that can go into the test at any given time. And we made these joints under 3 different conditions. We did a control set of pipes, joints made per standard ASTM F2620 cool times. That was our control set. We also made joints F2620 with McElroy Optimized Cooling. And finally, we added an optimized cooling comparison. So joints made to ASTM with F2620 with McElroy Optimized Cooling and an applied axial stress to mimic rough handling. Now, those of you in the call that have heard me talk about rough handling in the past, this is a really tough, touchy subject. One of the things we continue to get questioned about is rough handling. Rough handling immediately after fusion is not allowed in any standard in the world. None. No matter what you do, rough handling, there's a note in every standard that says rough handling is not allowed for an amount of time after the procedure. As part of McElroy Optimized Cooling, we emphasize that rough handling must follow. Now, we had a lot of questions from people saying, oh, you're concerned about that. We're not concerned about the rough handling. We are concerned that people are rough handling the pipe after fusion in any part of the standard, and it should be followed that you don't do rough handling. But we also know this is the real world. In addition to those questions about long-term testing, we get questions about what happens to the joint when someone in the real world does stress that joint. So we wanted to test to an extreme. And in my opinion, the test that we developed is a step we can control, and we developed what I believe is a very severe test. So how did we do this additional axial stress? We used one of the most powerful hydraulic rams we have in our possession, a McElroy fusion machine. After the optimized cooling time is completed and with the jaws remaining clamped, a calculated pressure was applied to the ends of the pipe, and we did this by opening the carriage to apply the stress on the joint. By opening that movable section of the carriage, we applied a really severe stress to that joint. In the field, you could think of this as the first joint in a long string being pulled out of the machine. So we not only applied the force, but we also held this force for a time equal to the heat time. For the DR11 pipe size, that is a 2.5 minute hold. So we applied the stress and held it for 2.5 minutes. For the DR7, it's 4.5 minutes. For the DR7 pipe, immediately after the end of the cooling time, we applied the stress for 4.5 minutes. The force we applied for the 6-inch DR11 pipe was 5,000 pounds. And to give you some perspective there, the force to pull a 40-foot stick of 6-inch DR11 on loose soil is around 200 pounds. So significantly higher than pulling it on loose ground. The force applied for the 6-inch DR7 pipe was 10,000 pounds. And again, for perspective, the force to pull a 40-foot stick of 6-inch DR11 on loose soil is around 300 pounds. So with these numbers, I'm confident, in my opinion, we've stressed this joint significantly. Now, what does that mean for the testing? The first set of joints that have gone through testing were made from a control set of material made to standard ASTM F2620 in both the 6-inch DR11 and 12-inch DR7. We made a test set using McElroy Optimized Cooling in 6-inch 11 and 12-inch DR7. And lastly, a set of joints made with the optimized cooling and the 5,000 pound applied axial stress to the 6-inch DR11 pipe. Now, none of these test joints failed the 1,000-hour test. So everything passed completely. The second set of joints is currently in process with pipe sizes 6-inch 11, 6-inch 7, and 12-inch 7. We expect that data to come out in October, with the final set of joints expected to be completed by the end of the year. So we're excited about this, to have that data available, and we'll have reports up on the McElroy Optimized Cooling webpage, along with all the other white papers and other information that is out there on that page for those of you that are interested in looking at that. So let's take a real world example. So we had a job that came up, and this was actually one of the very early jobs that came up. This was a group that had been very interested in looking at optimized cooling. The job was a 30-inch DR9 water line running for just over 16 miles, or roughly 26 kilometers of pipe. Using the standard F2620 fusion cool times, this job would take almost 1,850 hours of just fusion time. Now, this isn't setup, movement, or anything else. This is just the heating and cooling time on the project. So just heating and cooling time, it's almost 1,900 hours, 1,850 hours. Looking at the numbers and assuming a flat value for temperature, the optimized cooling time, the projected savings on this job were to take that fusion time down to 1,140 hours. So almost a 700-hour savings, a little over 700 hour savings on the job site. That potential of 710 man hours, or more than 71 man days on the project, was huge for this operator. Now I'll throw this out to the group. We don't have interactive here at the point, but what does a fusion hour cost a customer between equipment, personnel, exposure? Is it $500 per hour for this project? That would have been a $335,000 savings on this job. What if it's $1,000 an hour? What if you're on a huge job and you have equipment, you have operators, you have pipe handling equipment that you can free up? That would equate to over $700,000 savings on the job. No matter how you look at it, this customer was more than satisfied with the quality assurance that the data logger and the testing provided, and saw this as a huge savings potential for them, and they jumped on the opportunity for this project. All right. Good afternoon, Mike.
Jim, you've been a busy man today.
It has been fun. I even changed shirts. even had a wardrobe change.
That's right. Yeah. Exciting stuff. It's been a really great morning, and then new products being released just a couple hours ago. Pretty exciting.
It is. I'm really excited about this, and hopefully everybody on here got to see Jeff Coe's discussion on the new products and the Data Logger 7 and all the new pieces that are coming along with that. So the I series is really exciting. Really looking forward to getting people's hands on that piece of equipment. It's a game changer.
It really is.
Yeah. And you've been spearheading that part of it. So
yeah, I'm one of the group for sure. Great team working on it. So, but talk about game changers. McElroy Optimized Cooling. It's a pretty amazing game changer for our industry, and it's certainly been a buzz for probably the past couple of years. Last year, now that it's in full force in production, has really driven a tremendous amount of conversation that I've had, and I know you've had. And it looks like we have people starting to come on over and getting their questions in, and we can jump right in. And let's start off with our first question I'm going to display here. Okay, so current question is, Jim, with the additional testing that we have done, are you looking to shorten the time even more?
We continue to look at those numbers. I will tell you that we are, especially in the early days of this, looking to be at least conservative. There is the potential for them to be shortened even further, but in terms of adoption and acceptance, we want to make sure that people are comfortable with this, and to be able to do that. But in the background, along with everything else that we're testing for the existing formula, we're continuing to adapt, update, and look at opportunities to do that. So, long answer to a short question, or to a question, and simple answer is there is potential. Right now, we don't have any specific time or plans for that, but it is on the science side of it, looking at it and continuing to follow that and see what we can do.
Yeah, great. And the good thing about it is if we do make any changes being deployed on the data logger, it comes along with an update. You know, there's nothing the user has to put into action. So
other than they have to update their data logger.
They have to update the data. That's a good point. Yeah.
Little PSA here. We would ask you, please update your data logger. We're pushing out these software updates to give you new features and address any issues that possibly could come up. And we had one that we talked to, you and I talked to them about 6 weeks ago, and it was almost 30 releases behind.
Almost the original.
They had never updated their data logger. So if you have a data logger 6, please click that update button.
Yes, please do. Okay, here's another one coming at you. Will you be adding any other materials other than HDPE to McElroy Optimized Cooling algorithm?
So right now we don't have any on the blocks, but there is potential, especially as we get anybody that comes to us and says, "Hey, we have opportunities there." There is within the polypropylene world already a change that allows some shortening of cool time within the newest release. So there are some opportunities for us to have more materials and to look at other items. Right now, our focus has been on HDPE, but we definitely are open to looking at other materials and looking at other opportunities.
Yeah, definitely. And the next question actually kind of goes hand in hand with that. But any chance that we are consider optimizing the polypropylene through similar research and testing? So that's pretty interesting. A little deeper question there.
Yeah, yeah. So the potential is yes. We haven't started anything on that project. The reality is that cool time is fairly quick today, but this is very similar to what we've seen in the HDPE world as pipe has gotten bigger and wall thickness has gotten heavier. We also see that in the polypropylene world. We're seeing larger pipe, we're seeing thicker walls, and so there's definitely an opportunity that we could look at that and kind of follow that same methodology and process there as well.
Yeah, and that does go along with the ASTM looking at polypropylene
Yes, there is
as well. So
yeah, setting up a full ASTM standard there so that we've got a good North American ASTM base for anybody in the world that's using ASTM. There's quite a bit out there.
Yeah, great. Boy, they're really targeted, it feels like. Let me throw this next one up there. With today's higher performing resins, we're finding we often need to increase heating time 2 to 3 times the old standard to meet the minimum bead melt requirements. So is there any progress? So this is there's some interesting conversation going on with that.
Yeah. I will answer the question and also tell you that we're having a session tomorrow. I have a session on heavy wall fusion best practices, and the modern materials. There is we have heard instances where it is a real problem to reach the bead size requirement within F2620. So a couple of things, give you a hint to tomorrow's standard. Run at the higher end of your temperature range for the heater. So allowable is 400 to 450. You want to be in that upper end of that 440, 450 range, and lower side of the allowable interfacial pressure range. That will help a little bit. The history there is that TR33, which is the basis for F2620, was really done with medium density pipe, and medium density pipe, for those of you that have used it, flows really nicely. It makes that beautiful double rollback bead that we all know doesn't exist in the real world. But those bead size were based on that material, and the modern materials are a little bit stiffer material. They have what's called a lower melt index, and that is something that on the standard side of the world that we're having to really look at and consider further. Unfortunately, I don't have a really great answer for you on how to get to that bead size, other than the heat soak really is the critical path of that. We want to make sure we're getting the right amount of heat into the pipe. And if you are getting that heat in, the bead size is really just a secondary indication of that heat going into the pipe rather than the critical nature of the bead. So part of it is we've got to get the standards updated. That's going to take a little bit of time.
And that is the breakout that they can tune in for that is working with large diameter or thicker wall pipe, correct?
Heavy wall
pipe. Yeah. So definitely more conversation on that tomorrow.
Yeah, that is all right. Sorry, best practices for joining heavy wall pipe tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
Yeah, and I will say that is a really interesting session. You really get into it and explain it well. And then, kind of spinning that into optimized cooling. And there's a great thing is we know the longer you're leaving that, the algorithm does take that into account in the data logger. So
yeah, that's a great point. And that's the reason we have to use a data logger, because we are taking into account how much heat you're putting into the pipe. So in the case of the person that asked this question, if you are heating for 2 or 3 times longer than the standard, that is actually being taken into account during the data log cycle to calculate the new time frame.
Yeah.
So
yeah, one of the key inputs for sure. This goes in, it's pretty interesting. Has McElroy considered doing a video or any distance learning piece on proper pipe handling techniques after that joint has made?
that is a great question. And I would say, yes, we need to do that, but I would just, this is my personal bias, but I will tell you, it's not specific to optimized cooling. This is important. I don't care how you do it. I looked at a fusion yesterday, no, day before yesterday. Someone sent me a joint that had obviously been picked up by a single basket coil right on the joint, and it stressed one side of the joint. And this was something that didn't go through McElroy Optimized Cooling or any other kind of cooling process. It had gone through the standard procedure, but they did a choker lift, single point right at the joint, and let that pipe droop down on both sides of it, and completely stressed the joint itself. So this proper handling is important no matter what procedure you're following. So yes, the simple answer is we have considered it. We need to get it up to the top, and we'll add that to the list for McElroy University. If you're going to attend McElroy University update with Paul Brodsky, it'd be a great question to ask him again tomorrow if you have a chance.
Yeah, and that, just spending a little time on that topic, when you're in the data logger and you select the optimized cooling standard selection, you are presented with a confirmation, and that's actually in there. Obviously we want people to read it, but it's just to remind everybody, right? It's for all fusion, and it's just a good reminder. It's not saying it's any more important necessarily for optimized cooling, just that it's a good reminder that this is what you're selecting, and with all fusion you need to consider that.
Yep.
Yeah. And then also to throw in, from the McElroy side, we're pretty invested in it with the productivity tools and rollers, and the things that we offer are very important also to help you with that pipe handling. And oftentimes when you're on a job site, that's what you see is not always the most invested in that side of the equipment, and
right.
Can definitely be done.
Right, but it pays back huge dividends.
Absolutely, yeah. So here, okay, this one's going to test you a little bit as far as how you approach this. Could you comment on those people who are reducing cool times, regardless of the standard that they're using, or without a controlled, proven method, such as McElroy Optimized Cooling?
So I would say it's a little bit of a concern. The upside is that polyethylene is an incredibly forgiving material. It is an amazing material in terms of the range of heat, the range of pressures, the range of cooling times that can be allowed. One of the reasons we wanted to really do this is that control aspect of it, that repeatability piece of it. So that when Mike, if you came to me and said, "Hey, show me that you did this the same way every time," that there's truly a backup that shows me that you're doing it consistently. And what we've found as part of our testing was that the pipe temperature itself really does have a pretty big effect. West Texas is the one we always throw out. This could be Australia, this could be wherever in the world. But on a given day, today, well, heck, here in Tulsa, it was 55 degrees Fahrenheit this morning. It'll be almost 80 this afternoon. West Texas during the summer, you could see out in the desert, you could see 55 degrees overnight and 110 during the day. And so the difference between that pipe at 55 degrees and that pipe at 110 degrees takes a longer time to fuse. So we're actually showing you, we're calculating, if you're fusing 55-degree pipe, you're going to get a specific core wall temperature at the end of the cooling time. If you're fusing 110-degree pipe, you're going to get that same temperature, but it's going to take longer to get to that temperature. So we're giving you a consistency so that you know that you have a good, strong joint every single time, no matter what your variables going in, the pipe temperature, the air temperature, and the amount of heat time that you put into it. So back to that example is maybe on one joint, for some reason, the bead forms and I get my 3/8 bead at the standard heating time, but the next joint, I end up heating 3 times as long. That's a lot of heat that went into that pipe. It's got to come down to temperature in order for that joint to be as strong as we want it to be. So, you know, the difference, I won't comment on what somebody is or isn't getting because we don't know. It's inconsistent. What you get with McElroy Optimized Cooling is control. And with the data logger, you've got backup that shows that you followed the process. And, you know, and it may vary during the day. It may be 20 seconds or 2 minutes or 4 minutes longer in the heat of the afternoon than it was at first time this morning. But that's an important difference in those steps.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the sensibilities that people have. If it's hotter, the pipe is hotter, the sun is loading on it, and those things, well, yeah, it's going to take longer to come down to a certain temperature. And I think to this point about people doing things in the field, and maybe that's what they are trying to use some sensibilities to do it, to cut it. But again, there's no controlled process when they're doing that. It's all per that operator, and that's what we're giving you, right? Is a method to follow every time. So good point there. Let's go to this next one. Really interesting questions. How many optimized cooling joints are in the vault today?
I don't have an exact number today, but it's around 31,000 joints.
Yeah, incredible. I mean,
yeah, it really is pretty astounding. The adoption here.
Yeah, and then this is a 2-part question, or really a 3-part. So for those who are not using McElroy Optimized Cooling yet, have we heard of a common reason for not adopting, or saying it differently, in what situations would you not use McElroy Optimized Cooling?
So, you know, I think there are situations you're not going to use it for tie-ins. You're not going to use it for one off or 2 off kind of joints, and unless you want to. I mean, the advantage really is that example I gave at the end of my presentation, a long run job where you're saving tens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours on a job. I have seen, and Mike, you've seen some of these too. We've seen some projects where it's 1 or 2 and they want to use it, and you know, at the end of the day, they're saving 12 to 13 minutes on a large diameter part. That's 12 to 13 minutes that are saved. I think as the opportunities come up, it really is the comfort level to know that there's testing behind it, there's validation behind it, there's all of the pieces that go along with it. But where you don't use it, I don't know that I would say that there's any place that you wouldn't use it, other than some complex situations, a tie-in, a vertical fusion, you know, something where you really need where you're bringing in a specialty operator to do a specialty operation.
Right. I would say if you know there's a stress that's going to be put on the pipe as soon as you unclamp it.
Right.
You know, that's we're getting into this definition of rough handling. That's going to be rough handled.
Right,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
And regardless of optimized cooling, you need to be looking at how you're doing your cooling and how you're doing your
Yeah.
handling on that, on those joints, especially
Yeah.
in an extra way. You don't just slap them down.
Yeah. I think, going kind of at the heart of that question about reasons for not adopting, I think it's people really need to see it, kind of see what others are doing, how they're putting it in place. It feels like this proof, I just need proof, and they want to see others doing it to make them comfortable. I think, yeah, that what we've seen from the Vault and the other users out there in the world, it's becoming widely adopted. Matter of fact, we have users how that is their standard practice, and they have defined, this is when we won't. The times like a certain tie-in or certain situation, this is when we will not deploy it. We'll adjust our cooling. But that's how they operate their business now.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, okay. A little more direct question. Do we have a calculator that will show folks the time? And they have very specific, like a 24 or 30-inch DR21.
So it's a trick question, and I'm not going to answer. The simple answer is we can help you with giving some rough estimates. Remember that there's variables that go into this: the temperature, the pipe temperature, and the heat soak time. And so we can help you on a job. If you're trying to sell or if you're trying to show something, we can help you with some estimates and basically do a 75-degree Fahrenheit, 23 degrees Celsius standard temperature and pressure kind of calculation to say, okay, on a given day, this is what you could see. Or if you know it's going to be 90 degrees, 40 degrees Celsius. Oh, that's way off. But we can help you with that. The simple answer is we are not going to put it in McCalc because those variables are critical to the input. And if you just put it in McCalc, you're back to that earlier question of people who just cut the time. So again, in the morning, cool morning, my cool time might be 12 minutes. Late afternoon, in the heat of the sun, my cool time might be 15 minutes. But we know that that's a critical path. We know that difference of only 3 minutes really is a big difference in terms of getting down to the core of that wall thickness and getting it cool to a point where we're comfortable with the handling.
Yeah,
so
we have another question I just threw up there. It's a comment and a question about somebody who is using it in the field. So that's great. Another user tuning in, but asking directly about McCalc, and we get that question all the time about why can't you put it in there? And, I think maybe speak to what's really going on in the data logger whenever you're fusing. You want to speak to that? And
yeah. So from joint to joint, you're putting in the temperature, the ambient temperature, the bulk pipe temperature, and then the data logger is actually calculating the heat time that's put in there. So when you're heating that pipe, the data logger knows when that heating has started and when that heating has ended, and that is a critical part of that patent pending formula for McElroy Optimized Cooling. And all three of those variables are very, very core parts of that formula and the output that generates then the cool time. So if I'm going joint to joint, but my heat time changes joint to joint, there's the potential that my cooling time will change joint to joint. And then throughout the day, if I start at a very cool temperature and go to a very high temperature, my cool time is going to change. It is live calculated every single time. And that critical nature, including the calculation of the heat time. So you couldn't do that with McCalc. You wouldn't be able to calculate all your times and do all your things and enter this data in the process. So
I empathize with the question of having it out there, but the point is that we're really using live data, and it does matter joint to joint, and that's why it's critical that it's done in the data logger.
Yeah, and there's a few points in there where like you can't go on if you're selecting a McElroy Optimized Cooling, and if you don't enter the bulk pipe temp or the ambient, you're going to get stopped. We need these values to calculate. And then in the fusion process, there's even a little additional step to help us mark a known point in time. And it all adds into that calculation. So that's what's going on. If somebody hasn't used a data logger yet and they want to go see it, this is they're going to notice a few things that are different. So yeah, great point. Okay, this one they must have tuned into the previous session. So does the new I series have the ability to incorporate McElroy Optimized Cooling?
Absolutely, yes, it does. Absolutely, and remember that the I series is all of the data logger functionality plus a whole lot more. So yes, it is incorporated in there. So every machine will have that capability embedded in the machine itself, and the data logger 7, obviously on the standalone side of it, still has it. You really won't see any difference on the data logger 7 as a standalone unit. Using your data logger as you do with the data logger 6, that software, that interface is exactly the same. So no difference. Again, easy transfer, easy technology transfer there.
Yeah. And it just adds the efficiencies and the little processes you're gaining out of the I series. Couple that with the optimized cooling. I mean, you know where we're going here, right?
We're I mean, the ability to really improve your times is amazing.
Absolutely. Okay, this is next question is, so are you aware of any McElroy Optimized Cooling being used in the UK market under GIS PL3 standard?
No, I am not aware of any of that. So the difference there is with GIS PL3, ASTM F2620 has a specific clause in it that allows for a cooling process to occur. GIS doesn't have that clause. If you are in an environment where you have an alternative to say you're going to follow the ASTM procedure or use an alternative procedure with validated testing, we can help you with that. But as it stands today under the GIS rules, there's not an allowance for that cooling function. Long term, it's something that we'd be happy to help you look into or have some inquiries to keep that going forward. Yeah. Same with ISO.
So that's actually the next question, but there's a little spin on it. So for those using ISO or DVS standards, so is there an easy transition to optimized cooling?
So for DVS is a low force standard. We have not done any testing on low force. So in terms of DVS, I would say there's really not a lot there. What we are looking at is a high force procedure, and there's a lot of detail that goes into that. I could almost probably talk for an hour on that alone. The high force procedure squeezes more material out of the joint than a low force procedure, and therefore the cooling effects are better in terms of that joint. In fact, you see shorter cooling times for high force procedure than you do for low force procedure in general terms, even without optimized cooling. So those direct comparisons, high force procedure is already shorter. On the ISO side, where we see this as an opportunity, there is not a statement in ISO that allows for cooling one form or another. But where we have opportunities, Australia is a good example. There have been allowances for cooling procedures to be accepted within the governing bodies that are there, whether it's ISO or another accepted procedure. So we're happy to help you if you have an opportunity where you're in a ISO high force opportunity and we can talk to people about the testing and the validation and where this is a procedure that validates. ISO high force was really based on the inception of ASTM F2620 and the TR33 world. So those are very, very similar procedures at the end of the day, and we've seen some real success with being able to get high force procedure as a generic term accepted in many environments, and especially with the testing and the opportunity with optimized cooling.
Right. Just to reiterate, when you're using a data logger and you do select a standard, it's only ASTM F2620. You will see a couple options there with the -12 and the -19. Do you want to, once you cover that?
Yeah, those are the years of the publication of that document. So the 2012 ASTM F2620-12 has most recently been adopted in the U.S. by the DOT and PHMSA, who are the regulatory body that cover natural gas distribution. So they are very specific to ASTM F2620-12. The newest and current version is ASTM F2620-19. There is a change that is going through right now. If that gets completed this year, there will be an ASTM F2620-20. If it doesn't happen until after the first of the year, then it'll be ASTM F2620-21. So you will see another change coming with F2620. But that's really the only difference in those. The procedure side of it itself is exactly the same. The pressures, the temperatures, the ranges.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Just getting some messages here about just, awesome job. So people are pretty interested, and we're glad, and out in West Virginia, so we know who that is, and
yep.
Some friends of ours out there. And I'll say, especially for them, a lot of gathering going on out there, and big pipes, thick walls. They've got a lot of head pressure, and that's where optimized cooling is probably another good topic, Jim, is to talk, where do you see the most benefit with optimized cooling?
So, it's interesting. The most benefit that we typically see is in that heavy wall pipe, because it is a long cooling time. So if I can shortcut a very long cooling time, I'm saving a lot more time. But if you go back to my graphs from the presentation, we're seeing it in all kinds of wall thicknesses. Now, some of those are very large diameter, light wall thicknesses. So 63-inch DR21 is still a pretty thick wall pipe. You're basically looking at 3-inch wall thickness. But thick wall pipe, definitely a great advantage there, because you're cutting down a larger piece in terms of time. But we see it in some lighter wall stuff as well. We see people using it and taking advantage of shorter times, even for a short period. If I'm doing a lot of 10-minute cool time jobs and I can cut that to 5 or 6 minutes, if I'm doing a lot of those still add up.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of advantage. I would say that the really, really big advantage is when there's a lot of anything. Long jobs, lots of joints, those pieces. So whatever that savings is adds up over the series of the job. But again, we see people doing 1 and 2 joints at a time as well using this. So they see some advantage. The truly big dollar value advantage is if you're bidding a job and say, I can do this, I can save 700 hours on this job. Think about the way you can bid that against competitive products, against competitive materials, and be ahead of the game.
Yeah. And I think that's the exciting piece that I continue to hear, is this just continues to put our industry, which makes it more competitive against other materials. That's where we really need to go. And optimized cooling is a critical piece in that as well. So, okay. No other questions coming in. I may make one more comment about, another area that I get asked often is dual containment. Have
Yep.
you done anything with dual containment?
We have not done any specific testing with dual containment. It would be something that we would look at, you know, as part of our continued testing, but we have not done any specific testing on dual containment. The simple answer is you could look at that in terms of the heavier wall pipe, because that's really your longest cool time. So we got to think about that and how we look at what those two joints are. And that's really specific to simultaneous dual wall containment. If you are somehow doing a non-simultaneous dual wall, so you've already got a liner pipe fused, then you could apply it to the single pipe very easily. But that simultaneous, we haven't done any testing to be able to say, here's where you need to go with that.
Great. Okay, I think that's all of our questions, and we're getting really close to time.
Yeah,
anyways.
we're getting right up. Mike, thank you for helping, and I'll pitch out. Mike's got some really exciting sessions. As you guys look at optimized cooling, please don't hesitate to reach out either to Mike or myself. We're happy to help, whether it's helping you quote, helping you understand it more, whatever you can do. We do have a full web page on the McElroy.com website that is McElroy Optimized Cooling, with videos, white papers. We're constantly working to update that, so you'll be watching for some new updates on it very shortly. And what else have I missed, Mike?
Oh, I think you hit it all. Great
All right.
presentation. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks everybody for listening. We appreciate all the great questions, and look forward to talking to you further about this.
Thanks, everybody.
And we'll be 300,000 joints by the next time we talk.
That's right. It will.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.